The conference room buzzed with the chatter of aspiring entrepreneurs pitching their million-dollar ideas. I scanned the crowd, feeling out of place in my faded sanitation uniform amidst the sleek business casual attire. A voice caught my attention, a man holding court with a group of admirers. "You see, the key is identifying the mark and reeling them in slowly," he said with a sly grin. "Make them invest emotionally first. Then, when you've got them hooked, you go for the kill." I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but the sheer audacity of his words transfixed me. The man continued, oblivious to my presence. "There's a new wealthy guy in town, a tech mogul type, newly divorced, ripe for the picking. I've already laid the groundwork to get close to him. Once I have his trust and money invested, I'll bleed him dry before moving on to the next." The group murmured in admiration at his calculated scheme. My fists clenched. This smug conman was boasting about ruining an innocent man's life. "Excuse me," a female voice beside me said. "Are you lost?" I turned to face a pretty brunette giving me a polite but quizzical look. Before I could respond, the conman's gaze fell on us. "Lisa, there you are. I was just telling the guys about my latest business venture." He strode over, oozing confidence. Up close, I could see he was in his early 40s, well-dressed and disarmingly handsome despite the ruthless gleam in his eyes. "Carter, you sly dog," Lisa purred, playing along. "I can't wait to hear all about it." Carter smiled conspiratorially. "In due time, my dear. But first," he turned his attention to me, looking me up and down appraisingly. "Who's your friend?" I opened my mouth to lay into him, my righteous anger burning behind my eyes. But Lisa jumped in smoothly. "Carter Belmont, this is Mara Douglas. Mara, meet Carter, one of our most prolific entrepreneurs." Carter clasped my hand in both of his, holding it just a beat too long. "Enchanted, I'm sure. What brings you to our little soirée, Mara?" His piercing eyes bored into mine, and I felt the breath catch in my throat. My mind raced. Should I expose him here and now, or play along and uncover the full extent of his swindling scheme? Shoving aside my reservations, I plastered on a polite smile. "Actually, I'm very interested in your business ideas. Perhaps you could enlighten me further over coffee." The words left a bitter taste, but Carter's eyes danced with intrigue as he squeezed my hand once more. "I thought you'd never ask." Carter proved to be a smooth talker over coffee, regaling me with tales of his entrepreneurial exploits. His charm was undeniable, but his eyes betrayed a cunning selfishness that made my skin crawl. "So, Mara, what's your story?" he asked at last. "I'm dying to know what grand ambitions bring a sanitation worker to a place like this." I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee, mulling how much to reveal. "I have a small sustainable waste management startup on the side, trying to get it off the ground, network, find investors." My voice trailed off expectantly. Carter's eyes lit up with feigned interest. "You don't say?" "An admirable calling. The world could certainly use more environmental consciousness these days." His gaze grew momentarily distant. "You know, my Elsie has been advocating for greener initiatives at her school. Maybe the three of us could discuss your project over dinner this week?" The offer took me by surprise. "You have a daughter?" "The light of my life," Carter said with a wistful smile. "Her mother, well, it's a long story. But Elsie keeps me grounded, reminds me what matters most." His demeanor shifted as he studied my face intently. "So what do you say? Dinner at my place Friday, 7 o'clock? I hesitated, considering my options. This was the perfect chance to gain Carter's trust and unravel his con from the inside. But could I risk getting tangled up with a criminal and his innocent daughter? Before I could respond, a girl of about 12 with curly red hair bounded up and threw her arms around Carter in a fierce hug. "They're my two favorite people in the world." Carter beamed, hugging her back tightly. He turned to me with paternal pride. "Mara, I'd like you to meet Elsie, my daughter." Elsie gave me a shy smile and a small wave. Despite myself, I felt a pang watching their clear affection and bond. "Hi, Elsie," I said warmly. "Your dad was just telling me about your passion for the environment." She brightened instantly. "Oh, yes. We implemented a new recycling program at school last month, and I'm trying to convince Dad to finally get those solar panels he's been talking about forever." Elsie shot Carter a pointed look, and he chuckled. "Touché, kiddo. Maybe Mara can help us with that." As the three of us chatted about environmental issues, Carter's devotion to his daughter seemed genuine. I found myself inexplicably charmed by their banter and easy rapport. Was this all an act? Part of his scheme to lure in unsuspecting victims? Or could there be a real father-daughter bond behind the conman's bravado? By the time they'd convinced me to join them for dinner, I knew I was in too deep to turn back. Despite my better judgment, I was letting Carter Belmont and his precocious daughter reel me in. The weeks following that first dinner flew by in a whirlwind. Carter and Elsie grew increasingly inseparable from my life as I fell deeper under their spell. I marveled at Carter's ability to seamlessly alternate between charismatic entrepreneur and doting single father. Before I knew it, Carter was persuading me to move in, insisting it would make co-parenting Elsie much easier. Despite the dissonant voice of caution in my mind, I acquiesced, touched by his apparent trust and desire to blend our lives. Then one night, Carter broached the subject of Elsie's schooling over a home-cooked meal. "Sweetheart, you know how much I prize your education," he began, clasping her small hand. "That's why I've decided to send you to Brookfield Academy next year." Elsie's eyes widened in delight. "The private school? With the amazing science labs?" Carter nodded solemnly. "Only the best for my girl." But he shot me a meaningful glance. "Their tuition is rather steep. I'll need some help with the fees." Realization dawned, and my fork slipped from my fingers, clattering on the plate. Surely he didn't mean... "Mara, you're practically family now," Carter interjected, placing his hand over mine. "I was hoping you could co-sign the loan with me, so Elsie has this wonderful opportunity." My mouth went dry as I studied the earnest look on his face. After everything, how could I deny his daughter a brighter future? "Of course," I heard myself murmur. "Anything for Elsie." Carter's relieved smile made my chest clench oddly. Elsie, oblivious to the tension, threw her arms around both of us, bubbling with excitement. In the ensuing weeks, new discrepancies in Carter's stories emerged. Late nights away from home, shady business associates always calling, even his typical financial concerns seeming overblown for a successful entrepreneur. When I finally worked up the nerve to pry about the Brookfield loan's disbursement, he smoothly deflected with placating reassurances. Still, the seed of doubt planted itself, feeding my lingering suspicions about who this man really was beneath the charming veneer. The breaking point came when reviewing our joint finances. I discovered the loan amount had vanished without a trace. No record of Elsie's enrollment or even an application. Sickening betrayal gripped me as the harsh truth materialized. I'd been played, swindled by a master manipulator, robbed of my money, dignity, and trust by the very man I'd let into my home and heart. Worst of all, I'd been a willing participant in that innocent girl's deception. That night, after Carter departed for another business meeting, I numbly packed a bag and composed a letter to Elsie, my eyes stinging with betrayal. This con had gone too far. If exposing Carter meant protecting his daughter from his toxic influence, then so be it. By morning, I'd be gone. But not before plotting my final, ruthless act of karmic revenge. In the days after my bitter departure, a fugue of hurt and anger consumed me. I pored over financial statements, internet searches, legal records, anything to trace the depth of Carter's betrayal. The more I uncovered, the sicker I grew at the sheer enormity of his schemes. This wasn't his first con, not even close. Public court documents revealed a long trail of swindled investors, bankruptcies, and asset seizures stretching back over a decade. Aliases, ghost companies, defrauded exes. His misdeeds formed an intricate web of deceptions. All those times he claimed money troubles from failed startups or investments, he was merely bleeding another mark dry. And I'd been his latest, loneliest dupe. My fists clenched, crumpling the papers bearing his litany of sins. This sociopath had used his own innocent daughter as a pawn to lend credibility to his ploys. Elsie, that sweet, trusting girl caught in the crossfire of her father's unrelenting avarice, the white-hot rage crystallized into an icy resolve. It was time to bring Carter Belmont's house of cards crashing down for good. First, I gathered every shred of proof, cleared out bank accounts, doctored loan documents, even surveillance footage capturing him with other suspected associates and marks. Then, I scoured social media for his previous victims, sending letters pleading for their help in collectively taking him down. One by one, the responses trickled in. A divorced mom from Illinois, an elderly businessman in Arizona, each more enraged by Carter's duplicity than the last. We forged an unbreakable alliance, bound by our thirst for justice. With the assembled evidence, my merry band of co-conspirators presented an ironclad legal case to the district attorney. No more charming excuses or convoluted deceptions would save Carter this time. Next, I turned my attention to his unwitting benefactor, the nameless tech mogul I'd overheard during that fateful conference. I knew Carter's endgame was sinking his grift's hooks into this new, deeper pocket. Thanks to some carefully worded inquiries, I uncovered his identity and reached out with the full dossier on Carter and a stark warning. You're being targeted by a seasoned con artist. Get out while you still can. Within days, I received a terse, grateful reply. Carter had been fired from his consulting role and given a stern police warning. Whatever scheme he had planned lay in ashes before it even began. My small triumph, however, was just the opening salvo in my battle to dismantle his life. Finally, I returned to the tiny suburban home where Carter and Elsie lived. The Achi-Achi lovebird symbol glaring from their flamingo mailbox filled me with revulsion, a bitter reminder that I'd nearly stumbled into a twisted facsimile of familial bliss, all on Carter's selfish whims. Jaw-clenching, I strode up the front walk and raised my fist to pound on the door, to finally confront the cancerous lie at the heart of their outwardly idyllic existence. This time, I wouldn't be the one slinking away in shame and defeat. This time, Carter Belmont would be compelled to answer for his unforgivable sins. No more running. No more charming deceptions or manipulation tactics. It was time for the man to meet his karmic reckoning. Carter opened the door, that familiar suave mask sliding into place, but I saw the fractional widening of his eyes. He hadn't expected me to return so boldly. Mara, he greeted with an uneasy smile. This is a surprise. What brings you by? Can it, Carter? I shoved past him into the living room, hands trembling with equal parts rage and satisfaction. The jig is up. Elsie emerged from the hallway, looking back and forth between us with obvious concern. What's going on? Nothing to worry about, Princess. Carter moved to put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged him off, her young face uncharacteristically guarded. My chest tightened. Had she already pieced together her father's deception? The thought of that sweet girl's innocence shattering fueled my resolve. Rounding on Carter, I stabbed an accusatory finger into his chest. I know all about your schemes, the fake companies, the bankruptcies, the stolen money from investors and partners. It's a wonder you aren't already rotting in jail. Carter's mask faltered, a sneer twisting his lips. I have no idea what you're insinuating, but I suggest you leave before this gets ugly. Ugly? I gave a harsh, mirthless laugh. It's been ugly from the start, using your own daughter as a prop to lend credibility to your cons, preying on my emotions to drain my accounts. That's low, even for a soulless bottom feeder like you. Mara, Elsie spoke up, voice small yet laced with dread. What are you saying about Dad? I opened my mouth, but Carter cut me off, turning his full persuasive force on his daughter. It's okay, sweetheart. This is all just a misunderstanding. Mara is confused, that's all. His eyes bored into mine, a silent warning burning in their depths. Isn't that right? The audacity of his gaslighting struck me momentarily speechless, until an instant later when the dam finally burst. A misunderstanding? You lied and stole from me, Carter, wiped out my savings, my trust, all for your selfish greed. I whirled on Elsie, who flinched. Don't you see? This man is a fraud who's been using you to con innocent people for years. Carter paled, recoiling from my vehemence. Good. He should be afraid now that the full truth was spilling into the open. Planting myself squarely in front of Elsie, I dropped my voice to a gentler tone. Your dad isn't who you think, sweetie. He's been lying to both of us. Her lower lip trembled, and her gaze flitted uncertainly between us. In that moment, I felt a fierce protectiveness. This girl deserved to know her father's monstrousness before his deceit ruined her life, too. Digging into my coat pocket, I withdrew a crumpled manila envelope and thrust it toward Elsie. Everything's in here. Proof of his crimes, his past victims, all of it. I'm so sorry you have to find out this way. But you need to know the truth about the man you should have been able to trust above all others. Tear-filled eyes stared back at me for a suspended moment. Then, with hands barely steady, Elsie took the folder and began reading in silence. Carter said nothing, rooted in place and grave realization darkening his features as his empire of treachery crumbled around him. For once, the conman had been comprehensively, irreversibly conned. Carter tried desperately to regain control as Elsie pored over the damning evidence, her expression shifting from confusion to outright horror. "Princess, let me explain," he began, stretching out a placating hand. Elsie flinched away from his touch, clutching the folder to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she finally raised her devastated gaze to him. Is it true? Everything in here about what you've done?" Carter opened his mouth, but no smooth lies issued forth. He could only hang his head in uncharacteristic silence, the first crack in his shameless armor. "How could you, Dad?" Elsie whispered, betrayal rendering her small voice almost inaudible. "All those people. Mara." A flicker of Carter's trademark manipulation flashed in his eyes as they bored into mine. "Listen to me, Elsie. Mara is just a vengeful, bitter woman trying to turn you against your own father." I bristled, ready to unleash a fresh torrent of vitriol. But Elsie raised her chin, defiance burning through her anguish. "Don't," she said, voice trembling yet firm. "Don't you dare try lying anymore. I thought I knew you, but this—" She flung the manila envelope at his feet, its contents spilling across the wood floor. "I don't even recognize this monster." Carter recoiled like she'd struck him, an ugly sneer twisting his features. For an instant, I worried he might lash out. There was no fury quite like a narcissist exposed. Instead, he seemed to deflate before my eyes, bravado fizzling out in the wake of Elsie's disgust and condemnation. The once charming, self-assured facade lay in ruins. "Elsie, please," he mumbled, reaching out in a desperate final gesture. But the girl had already turned away, shoulders shaking, with quiet sobs as she fled toward the stairs. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the weighted silence. Carter looked from the closed door to me, opening and closing his mouth like a landed fish gasping for air. His famous gift of persuasion utterly failed him in those harrowing moments. Seizing my chance, I leaned in until our faces were mere inches apart, allowing my words to etch clearly into his psyche. "It's over, Carter. The lies, the games, the innocent lives you've ruined for profit, all of it. I've rallied your previous victims against you with everything they need to bury you in litigation. Your assets are being frozen, identities exposed. There's no wriggling out this time." His complexion grew ashen, green eyes widening in the first true fear I'd ever witnessed behind his bullish bravado. Good, let it finally sink in, what a incredible unraveling calamity he faced. "And Elsie?" I pressed on, inflicting the killing blow. "She wants nothing more to do with the despicable con man who played her for a fool all these years. You've lost her, Carter, the one person whose unconditional love might have salvaged a shred of your black heart." He recoiled as if burned, rasping wordless protests as I pressed forward, savoring his complete and utter ruin. "I'm going to make sure you pay for every deceit, every callous act of destruction you've wrought with those pretty lies. When the law is done with you, you'll be left with nothing. No riches, no respite, only the moldering legacy of irredeemable karma." By the time I finished, Carter Belmont looked every bit the husk of a broken man, drained of his charisma and bravado. His dark eyes simmered with a impotent yet palpable malice as our gazes locked. "I'll bury you for this," he growled through gritted teeth. "If it's the last thing I do." Flashing a vindicated smile, I simply shrugged. He had nothing left to threaten. I'm counting on it. With that, I turned and strode from the house, flinging the door wide in symbolic dismissal. The chapter of Carter Belmont had closed, his hollow menace evaporated by the light of his profound disgrace. All that remained was for karma to dole its final, devastating sentence. True to my promise, the legal onslaught against Carter was swift and merciless. My evidence formed the backbone of a multi-jurisdiction case, buoyed by the damning testimony of his past victims seeking long-overdue justice. Within weeks, the lawsuits started raining down: fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny, you name it. His business assets were frozen and liquidated to start paying court fees and restitutions. Carter's legal team put up a valiant fight at first, deflecting and stonewalling in typical fashion. But the sheer weight of his litany of misdeeds proved unstoppable, crushing line after line of their feeble defenses. I attended every court hearing, eager to witness the implosion of his sham empire in delicious real time. The man who'd once sauntered through life now sat shrunken and haggard, that arrogant smirk withered by the gravity of his reckoning. One particularly satisfying afternoon, the prosecution called his ex-wife Natalie to the stand, a whip-smart corporate attorney he'd tried swindling during their divorce. Carter watched stone-faced as she calmly detailed his financial chicanery during their marriage, pointing to forged documents and hidden assets. He thought he was so clever, so insulated by his lies, Natalie stated coolly. Yet in the end, the truth caught up to Carter just like it always does. The words seemed to burrow under Carter's skin as she delivered them with a vindicated smile. On the courthouse steps later, I seized the chance for one last parting shot as Carter was led to a waiting squad car, wrists shackled. "How's it feel to have the tables turned, you smug bastard?" I called out, pitching my voice to carry over the din of camera shutters. "Not so fun being the one deceived for a change, is it?" Carter whipped around, rage contorting his features into an uglier visage than I'd ever seen. For an instant, I thought he might lunge at me outright. "You've royally underestimated me," he snarled through clenched teeth. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." A few nearby reporters perked up at his outburst, shoving microphones toward us eagerly. But I simply shrugged, unfazed by his bluster and bravado. "Whatever lets you sleep at night in that puny little cell, Carter," I replied with a nonchalant wave. "Just remember, you brought this on yourself with your endless lies and cruelty." As he was bundled into the car, Carter strained to keep me in his furious glare through the rear window until the very last moment. I held his gaze levelly, refusing to let his empty threats rattle me after everything. In the end, every ridiculous gambits by his high-priced legal team crumbled under the relentless deluge of evidence and testimonies from his assorted victims. The walls closed in as each charge stuck, each asset dissolved to fuel the reparations. Carter Belmont, the once audacious and untouchable Conman, now sat crushed under the weight of 35 combined felony counts and over 2 decades' worth of prison sentences to serve. Despite his bloated ego, he couldn't escape his own karma. Just like he'd mercilessly preyed on the vulnerabilities of others for profit, his own insatiable greed finally caught up and viciously consumed him. It was undoubtedly a hefty price, but a necessary one to pay in full for the sheer enormity of his deceitful cruelty toward me and countless others. I made sure to be present for his final sentencing, staring Carter directly in the eyes as that plastic smile withered and died under the judge's devastating final ruling. In those last moments of delusional defiance came the spark of dawning, horrific realization. His menace was extinguished, his swindles exposed. Finally, he understood the grave truth staring back at him in unblinking judgment. Everything, his riches, freedom, very identity, all of it was lost forever in one fell swoop of karma's brutal sword. In the aftermath of Carter's sentencing, an odd melancholy settled over me. The all-consuming drive for vengeance had become singularly purposeful, lending my life a dark focus. Now, with that goal achieved, I felt unmoored, simultaneously relieved and emptied by the void his ruination left behind. Fortunately, I didn't have long to wallow. One sunny afternoon a few weeks later, a timid knock sounded at my apartment door. I opened it to find Elsie standing there, her expression a complicated blend of hope and trepidation. "Hey, Mara," she said hesitantly. "I was hoping we could talk." I stepped aside to let the girl enter, struck by the wearier look in her eyes, a sight that twisted my heart. Carter's ultimate betrayal had aged her prematurely in a way no child should have to endure. Yet as our conversation began haltingly at first, then gained candid momentum, I glimpsed the resilient core still burning underneath Elsie's world-weariness. Despite the immense violation of losing her father figure so traumatically, her spirit wasn't extinguished. If anything, his selfishness had galvanized an iron resolve to build a life adhering to integrity, a polar opposite to Carter's toxic mode of existence. When Elsie asked if I might be willing to help guide her through the transition to her new independence, I didn't hesitate before pulling her into a fierce embrace. "You've got a friend in me, kiddo," I murmured fiercely, "for as long as you need." In the turbulent months that followed, Elsie and I forged an unbreakable bond. I became her legal guardian through her final school years while she got back on her feet. We cobbled together a patchwork familial unit, forming the healthy foundation she'd been so cruelly deprived of during her father's reign of mind games. And through it all, I also resurrected my own shelved dreams, rebooting my sustainable waste management startup with a concentrated fervor. The initial seed money for my company came from an unexpected source, the court-appointed Victim Compensation Fund established from Carter's asset seizures. Elsie stood proudly by my side the day my company launched, beaming as she cut the ceremonial ribbon on our new facility. After so much ugliness and darkness, this represented a new dawn of personal triumph for us both, a tangible embodiment of moving onward. Indeed, Elsie flourished beyond all expectation in those ensuing years as her indomitable spirit fully blossomed. Though a part of her would be forever scarred by her father's misdeeds, she alchemized that pain into driving purpose and brightened my life tenfold with her tenacious optimism. For my part, I dedicated myself to extensive public education campaigns alongside my business's growth, sharing hard-won lessons on spotting deception and defending against exploitation. My cautionary tale of falling victim to Carter's manipulation resonated powerfully across demographics, inspiring others to fight against such societal toxicity. Better yet, I knew Elsie was receiving first-hand instruction in such ethics and resilience as she came of age under my guidance. The very embodiment of rising above adversity, she insisted on plowing portions of her college funds from Carter's restitution payments into partnerships with local nonprofits fighting fraud. We'd both started from such demoralizing powerlessness in the wake of his destruction. But in the end, Carter Belmont's nefarious legacy only forged two indefatigable individuals, shining beacons of integrity, overcoming malice through mutual perseverance and found family bonds. Standing beside Elsie always reaffirmed that all the pain, all the sacrifice was worth it to extract such phoenix-like renewal from Carter's quagmire of darkness. Our journey was a master class in the restorative powers of karma itself, demonstrating that even the wickedest of deeds could inseminate something transcendently beautiful when confronted head-on. As the sun set over our rooftop garden on Elsie's high school graduation night, I pulled her close, better appreciating the true depth of our unbreakable bond. No matter what, I told her fiercely, we'll always have this, an unshakable lighthouse amidst any storm that life throws our way. Elsie's radiant smile, so full of hard-won wisdom and perseverance beyond her years, was all the reply I'd ever need.